Okay, we're here. Did everybody do their homework last week? By the way, I'm Mordechai Kaufman, and this is Lekutei Moharan Siman Tet Vov. Va'atem tiyu li mamleches kohanim. You shall be to me kingdom of priests and a holy nation. Okay, let's go over there. We're going to go through all the way through the points again, and this time what we're going to do is we're going to spend a little bit of time on more of the Kabbalah that Rav Nachman is using in this particular lesson. Very, very often, as I explained last time, that Rav Nachman takes these Kabbalistic principles, particularly of the system of the Arizal of Isaac Luria, and he takes those cosmic principles, these grand Kabbalistic principles, and not only does he necessarily explain them, sometimes explains them, other times what he does, much more into a humanistic framework, an anthropological type of framework, with the basic idea being is that there is a mirroring, an analogous type of reality that exists between the way that the universe functions, the way the universe is created, and the way that man functions, the way that man is created or is composed and is made up. The idea behind that is that if man is the purpose and is the center and the tachlis of creation, okay, so everything within creation is there to support, to further, to help man in his being and in his onward progression. Okay, therefore, everything within creation is basically man, is centered about man, is for man. So therefore, all of those principles that are used in the creation, in the way that the cosmos comes into existence, in the way that is conducted, has an analogous correspondence in the way that man functions, the way that man is composed, the way that man works and operates. So there's a lot of this kind of psycho-emotional analysis that goes on, which of course is mirrored in the Lurianic Kabbalistic system. So here Rav Nachman, starting again from this point, as I explained to you, I really enjoy this part, this type of finger painting, that's there over there. And we'll start from the very, very beginning, right over here. That is Misha Rotzel Tam or Hagonos. Okay, if somebody wants to taste, to experience the taste of the Or Haganus, the hidden lights, Rav Nachman explains what are those hidden lights. Hainu Soda Sator Shis Galalosid. Says those are the secrets of the Torah, which will be revealed in the future. In other words, they're not for this world, not of this world, and not for this world. So if one wants to taste those, to experience that tam, one has to elevate the midah, the attribute, the quality of yira, of fear of God, back to its root. We talked about the idea of this or haganuz, or in gematria being 207. Backwards would be Resh Vav Aleph, would be Raz in Hebrew, is a secret, which is also 207. But also these ideas of them being this Sodot HaTorah, the secrets of the Torah. Sod is different than the word Raz. That is for sure. But you have this idea over here of the Yesodot, Sodot and Yisoda, Yud, of course, being the Nikudah, being that beginning point, the Chachma, the seed from which everything starts, which would be called that the letter Yud. A Yud together with Sod at the beginning of that word is Yesod, would be a foundation, would be the foundations of the Torah. In other words, the Or Haganuz, and a play in word, would be the Yesodot, or the foundations of the Torah. In other words, we're speaking here of what we would call the primordial Torah, the Torah which exists prior to creation, which is the realm of absolute pure potential and possibility, in which everything is there. Everything that possibly can be conceived is there, as well as its opposite in dialectical opposition as well. Everything is right there. That is what is called the supernal Torah. It precedes creation, is not of creation. It is as it were, in a certain way, a machshava, the machshava of the Kadosh Baruch Hu. You could go ahead and say such a thing, which of course, you really can't, because it's, anthropomorphic. It's using humanistic language and attaching that to the creator, which is something that's potentially troublesome. But nevertheless, is that the experience of this primordial realm, which is the Sodot HaTorah, the secrets of the Torah, is possible. It's possible even in this world, even though it's not of this world, okay? But the way that it has to be done, the way that one is able to experience, is via the elevation of Yira back to its absolute roots. Now, since we're talking about the Yesodot Torah, the foundations of Torah, effectively being in the primordial realm, we're talking here also in terms of the shoresh of Yira, the root, the basis of Yira, back to its absolute foundations. We're going to have a lot to say about that in a little bit, because what Reb Nachman is doing is he is alluding to the beginning, the commencement of creation, in grand Lorianic concept of the tzimtzum, of the contraction and so forth, which we'll talk about in a little bit. So in Bet, in number 2, paragraph 2, in Bet, uvameh malin asir. How does one go about elevating Yira? So Rav Nachman says, b'pchinas mishpat, the aspect of judgment. Judgment elevates Yira. Okay, Kamoshikos of Melech b'mishpat yamid aretz, is that the king via mishpat actually establishes, by means of judgment and the establishment of judgment and justice, okay, effectively establishes the land. In other words, his realm is built upon mishpat, the eretz hu bechinas Yira. Then in the word eretz is an aspect of Yira over here. Kamosha Kosuv, as it says in Tehillim, eretz Yora. In other words, the Kadosh Baruch Hu is basically going ahead and is going to affect judgment upon the enemies of Israel over here. And in terms of allowing that din to reverberate throughout all of creation, eretz Yora, the land fears, it trembles and it fears. Okay, so in other words, the land basically is talking about the inhabitants of it as a result of the judgment. Hainu sheyishbot et kol asakov. In other words, that a person has to go ahead and effectively adjudicate, in other words, look at himself and judge and engage in this process of self-examination in everything which he does, in all his affairs. As it says in Psalms, what he does is that he yechalkel, in other words, the conduct of his matter with judgment. Yechalkel means in a very, he takes account. He accounts for everything that he does via mishpat. Hainu sheyishbot v'yodin ba'atzmo kol asok. So Rav Nachman's establishing this idea over here is that Yira is elevated. And for those of you who have not been exposed to this type of writing before, this is very, very typical, in which Rav Nachman establishes a principle, talks about an idea, and then buttresses that idea with potential proof texts from Tanakh, in which he uses various psukim, various verses to capture the precise nature of what it is that he wishes to be expressing. So over here, the concept of Yira, fear of God, and we don't know exactly what that means. at this particular point. You might have an idea in your head what it means, but until you have the writer explain to you what it is that he is referring to when he's talking about Yira, you're basically making a supposition that you know what that is. And as a result, I would say, hold on for a bit, let Rav Nachman explain himself to you. But nevertheless, there is this idea of Yira, this Yira which seems to have fallen. For sure, it's fallen. Okay, but it has to be returned, it has to be elevated back up to its roots. And the way that that is done by means of an individual engaging in self-analysis, critical self-analysis of himself. In other words, he takes stock of what he is doing. Okay, we know, as we said last week, a lot of this is, this meditative, he's bodhidut, this type of meditative approach, which Rav Nachman, very, very, very strongly recommends, to all, and which is a cornerstone, certainly, of Breslov practice, is the regular engagement in his bodhidut, is this meditative a practice, each day, to the degree which one takes stock of oneself, and which one speaks to God. Not necessarily talking about tefillah right here. We're talking about a meditative process. But here, what are we talking about? We're talking about one who for his actions by means of self-examination. And with the idea being clearly is there's a rectification that's going of that which might be wrong. Okay, and in the process of taking account, and in the process of the self-examination and the rectification of that which has gone wrong, there is this elevation of Yira back to its roots. Okay, next page. Right here. I'll have to go ahead and paint. Right over there. Okay, good. He says, and by means of this self-analysis, Yasir me'alav kol hapchadim, and by means of this analysis, he removes all pchadim. These are basically things which frighten the person. All these things which frighten a person are removed. Okay, the examiner, because he realizes at the end of the day that the only thing that is truly to be feared and properly understood as fear is fear as Yira bar Nikia. And as a result of that, a very, very clear notion, a clear, clean notion of Yira emerges. V'tishayer ach yiras Hashem v'lo Yira acheres. And what remains then as a result of this critical examination of a person's reality, coming to grips with his true state of affairs, that which remains are not things which meaninglessly frightened him, that really are not real, but that which remains is a true yiras, no other fear. Rav Nachman continues, when a person does not judge, does not examine and analyze himself, show fate at atzma. He uses the word show fate. We would use the word, in almost a kind of psychoanalytical kind of a process of looking oneself. First, of course, there's just a simple process of looking and examining what did you do, what did you not do, what was good, what was not good. Did you do something? And it's almost as if in that hisbodedus process, you're talking to God like you're talking to a person that'd be sitting across from you, and you're explaining to them what you did, why you did it, what you were thinking about, and looking at these things, to develop, the sense not only of seeing self so clearly, but also to develop the idea of being alone with God, of being able to sense this feeling of being with God in the process. It's not an easy process. The process of looking at yourself is clear. That makes sense. Okay, but the idea of this hisboded is this being aloneness, as is the translation of this, being alone with God. and then speaking to God, about these things, and to examining, explaining the frustrations in your own language, as we're talking right now, which is exactly the way it is to be done, not in any other kind of language except that which your own, not in any other way as one speaks to one's psychiatrist. Okay, that is for sure. Okay, one looks at and examines self. That is what Rav Nachman calls shofet. That means adjudicate. That means adjudicate. Mishpat. Mishpat is exactly what that is. It's judgment, right? That's like almost a kind of a judicial type of process. Okay, there's certainly reason for that again, and Rav Nachman is again alluding to this Kabbalistic underlying principles which are here, which then prompts the use of this specific type of language. But getting back to what Rav Nachman is saying, he says again, if a person does not engage in the self-reflective judgment in analysis, it says azai donin v'shoftin also lamalo, then he's judged from above. In other words, one way or another, the balance that exists within creation will be upheld one way or another. It's either going to be, via the forces of a Kadosh Baruch Hu, the agency of a Kadosh Baruch Hu, or it's going to be through the individual themselves. Ki im ein din lamata, yesh din lamala, because as it says in the Midrash, if there is no judgment below, there is judgment above. So that's the reason why. He says, and what happens? What happens when there is this adjudication which takes place on above? Azai hadin is labesh b'chol hadvarim. What then happens is that the din and the process of the din, okay, the entire judicial process, as well as the ultimate judgment, becomes garbed in other types of things. Okay, you don't necessarily, unless you're particularly sensitive, understand exactly what's going on, because the judgment itself and the judicial process actually assumes a garment over it. In other words, a garment being is that it looks like something else which is going on. V'chol hadvarim nasim shluchim lamakom lasos b'zeh ish mishpat kasev. K'moshe amru chachmeinu zichron levracha lishpotecha amdu azah kol avodecha lasos din b'zeh adam. It says like this. It says, and then what happens is that everything within creation already becomes agents, shluchim lamakom. In other words, they become agents for a Kodesh to affect this judgment upon this individual. As it says, as Chachamim say, in the Gemara Nedarim, Lemishpotecha amdu, azai hakol avodecha. In other words, it's talking about this particular, verse in Psalm. Everything in creation stands ready to do your judgment. In other words, to accept your judgment, to perform that which is your judgment. Hakol avodecha, azai hakol avodecha. Everything are your servants. Lasos din b'zeh adam, and doing this, affecting this din with this particular individuals. Here is the being painted over here. This idea of Rav Nachman of the balance. We talked about this last week very, very briefly. Is that there is a balance, right and wrong, everything. There's nothing that goes unnoticed or unchecked, and ultimately there is a rectification that takes place, within, or by the forces of nature. In other words, appears to be a natural process of self-correction. But on the other hand, we know that there is really no such thing as nature. Everything is ultimately doing the will of God. These are the forces of a Kadosh Baruch Hu, which appear, of course, to be quite natural. The winds themselves are doing, put on the garments. They're there to affect judgment, so they put on the garments with are talking about. Okay, everybody with me here? Just let me touch base with you and make sure you're still there. As I said, I live in fear that at 8:30 or after an hour, what ends up being is that it wasn't working and nobody heard anything, and I was talking to myself for the entire hour. As I said, it's happened before. Okay, thank you very much. You can hear me. All right, good. Now let's continue further right over here. Aval, right here, this paragraph. Aval kishishofet esatzmo. But when the person engages in self-analysis, self-judgment, okay, self-reflective judgment, but when he does that, he short circuits. He short circuits this judgment, this lower judgment, this higher judgment, and as a result, he's able to go ahead and to affect the judgment that would have been affected by means of the shluchim of the Kadosh Baruch Hu, the ein hayira mislabish b'shum davar laorer esa adam. Okay, the fear does not go ahead and garb itself in anything to arouse the individual, to cause the person to think otherwise. Kihu ba'atzmo nisorer, because he himself is already alarmed. He's already on guard, and he's already taking the offense that which is in fact wrong. Okay, so that's called an elevation of the years, the correction of that which might be wrong, the fault, the sin, the insult, whatever the case may be. The zehu b'sum derech, and that's what it says. And he puts right, the path. Misha sum or chosov. That's somebody who actually, as the translator says quite rightly, evaluates his ways. And hainu sheshofet or chosov. That means to say that what he does is that he judges the way that he acts. As it says in the verse, these are the judgments which you shall place. These are the judgments you shall place in front of them. Tasim basically is there for the point of view of evaluation. In other words, the point of law, the point of justice is, first of all, to establish boundaries, limitations, assessments of one form or another, and to provide means via which a person is able to judge what he's doing right or wrong, because he has norms that are established in order for that to be done. That's of adjudication, whether that's by a court, by an individual, or ultimately by means of shemum. So he says, al yedei zeh, by means of that, you have this aren b'yeshu elokim. To him I will show the salvation of God. To him I will show zeh bechinas yira. This is the aspect of yira. Yira has the root in it, the concept of seeing, of understanding, as Kamosha Kosuv, as God you shall fear. Hainu bechinas yira olam aklipo me'umas ayidei mishpat. And this is the notion of the idea of the yira, which rises up from the klipa, which rises up from the lower elements in which it has fallen, and from amongst the nations by means of the mishpat. Because originally it was garbed in a klipa. A klipa, I would use the word a metaphoric shell, husk, a garment, something which covers it over, that is an issue, problem, is a discrepancy, is something which is out of balance, which has to be rectified. And once, in fact, that rectification or discrepancy or ill has been rectified, then what happens is the yira, which is clothed, as it were, or disguised up within particular klipa shell, okay, metaphorically speaking, it then is liberated, is torn out from that, and is able to rise back up to its proper source, because balance has been restored, and there is now no fallen a yira. Now, I'm going assumptions about a knowledge over here that Rebbe Nachman is assuming that one knows. We're talking about fallen year. What is fallen year? What are you talking about when you're talking about this mishpat and this balancing and all of this stuff? What is the roots of yira? What are the roots? Where are we going with this whole thing? And there's roots and it falls and then it's liberated or it's rectified by means of mishpat. You go ahead and you talk about balancing. All of these things. Do we understand what we're talking about? Well, we will a little bit as soon as we get the words properly understood. So he says over here is that this liberated, that the yira, the proper fear of God, is reflected in when the individual engages in this self-reflection and this self-analysis and judgment, and which is wrong, by means of understanding what it is that he is doing over there. He says, why would you do that? Because that's Yiras Hashem. That's a reflection, ultimately speaking, of Yiras Hashem, knowing that what is wrong, what is right, and doing it not only because of the fact that it is the right thing to do, but also doing it because it actually is the will of God, who has created this creation with boundaries, with borders, with limitations, with proper conduct that is established for us to do. Okay, and when in fact we insist upon our actions and our conduct meeting that criteria, and that the way that we're able to go ahead and ensure that it does is also to look at ourselves and see what it is that we do. You can't go ahead and look at yourself to see you don't know what you're doing, if it's right or wrong, unless you engage in a process of self-reflection. But here Rav Nachman is talking about a self-reflection that's rooted in wanting to do the will of God. In order to do God, we have to be able to look at ourselves to make sure that we are acting in accord with the will of God. And that is being able to look at our actions and see whether they are right or they're wrong, and correcting them wherever the need actually is. Now, he says as follows, he says like this. Yira rises, is elevated from the klipa and from the nations by means of mishpat. Originally, it is garbed in that klipa. Okay, that's where it is. And by means of this analysis, effectively, it is rectified. It is torn. You take the garment off of it. The klipa, the shadav, the meganavim, sharpchadim. Says this is a person, for example. What is a klipa? A klipa is when a person is afraid of things, afraid of something. Political leader, okay, or for ganavim, what ganavim are, or other types of things which frighten him. He says, Zehu shayir nislabish b'zeh davar. Says those other things are the klipa. Those are the things that are the garment, ultimately speaking. Ki im lo hoy b'zeh davar, lo hayakoch b'zeh davar lahafchi esa adam. He says because if they weren't in this garment, you wouldn't be afraid of them, because ultimately the only thing that there is to fear is the fear from a Kadosh Baruch Hu, because God is the one that's ultimately in control of everything. And these particular things that one is afraid of, the Tsar, the political ruler, the local despotism of him, all of these other types of things are only agents They're like the winds, which are the agents of a Kadosh Baruch Hu that become garbed in the winds, and these are the agents of a Kadosh Baruch Hu which become garbed in the form of ganavim or local leaders or different things of that sort. And ultimately, the truth of them, they're nothing. They have no real power. Their power comes from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The ultimate source of Yira, okay, is HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And that is the elevation. The elevation of the Yira is attaching that Yira back, which is with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, not with the street, not with the local politician or the local chieftain or anyone. None of these things have any power ultimately to frighten a person. Lo yikoch v'zed dov hafkin adam. If you went ahead and you stripped away the garment from these things, there would be absolutely nothing in them to fear. This is giving example of the notion of elevation of fear back to its proper place. In order to go ahead, and I said this is what we would do this time, we'll spend a few minutes, talking about a couple of the Kabbalistic principles, very, very basic principles, which are at play in this lesson, which are very, very basic, okay. In the Lorient system, the system of Ari, there's basically three great symbols. There's three great symbols that take place in the whole cosmic process of creation. Number one is Tzimtzum. Number two is what is referred to as Shviras HaKelim, the breakage of the vessels. And number three is Tikkun, which is this harmonious correction. Okay, Tzimtzum takes place by means of the following. What happens is as follows. If you haven't noticed it, if you haven't heard this before, let me go ahead and be the first to introduce it to you. To make a very long story short, it is actually a process via which the concept of creation makes some type of sense. Because the Kadosh Baruch Hu, before creation, everything is infinite. Everything is absolutely and utterly infinite, complete oneness, absolute oneness of a Kadosh Baruch Hu, nothing except Hashem. Okay, and if that's the case, and that fills up everything, in other words, it's infinite. Infinite means everything. If we're talking a quantum type of way, it means that it fills up. There is no room. There's absolutely no room for anything else. So where does creation get placed? Creation becomes like a type of absurd idea, because what you're doing effectively is you're adding on to infinity, and a God is infinity plus one, plus creation. And that's an absurd idea. Listen, all of the philosophers, one way or another, dealt with this particular idea and had great difficulties with this idea forever, going all the way back to the Greeks, so on and so forth. But anyway, in Kabbalah, the Arizal comes up with an explanation for it, creative, very elegant, and very beautiful, also extremely powerful and logical as well at the same time. And that is, he says that Kadosh Baruch Hu does not create by effectively step outside of himself in terms of emanation, something outside of himself. What he does though is withdraw into himself, and effectively he contracts away from his absolute infinite oneness in order to create what we would call a space, a primordial space, a chalal panoi, vacated space, within which all of creation can take place. Okay, now, in order to do that, a Kadosh Baruch Hu engages in a process known as tzimtzum. Tzimtzum means contraction. Absolute contraction is that this contraction takes place via which a Kadosh Baruch Hu concentrates all that particular power, which is known as din, into one particular place. Okay, and that effectively is the notion of withdrawal. Let me explain further what that means. Is that in Kabbalah, we have attributes that we metaphorically refer to with the Creator. Everybody's heard of this attribute of Chesed. Chesed is this externally oriented attribute. An externally oriented attribute, meaning Chesed, or we call Chesed metaphorically, is because an individual is kind, is generous to another outside of themselves. So you have the notion of Chesed. Whereas on the other hand, that which is inward oriented, which is constricting, which is limiting, which is boundaries, which is towards oneself, is referred to as din. Now, it might be that that's what din is. Din, at the ultimate sense, is looking at something in terms of how it into a prescribed notion of right or wrong, and an assessment of boundary, an established limitation, and so forth. That's the idea of din. The idea that we look at as being stern din, as being judgment, and as a result of that, that's something which is very, very frightening, whatever. But here, in this cosmic process of creation, the notion of tzimtzum, or Baruch he'll use the word himself, but we're for lack of a better word, that's what we said, is affected by the attribute of din, because internally oriented attribute as opposed to chesed. Okay. Now the problem with this, Father, I'm going very, very quickly in all of this. I understand that it's going to be difficult for a lot of people to be able to understand unless you know already and from before. And that is as follows: is that if you could imagine before there is any notion of creation whatsoever, and there's only the absolute oneness of the infinite God. In Kabbalah, it forces you to not only look at a Kadosh Baruch Hu, at the infinite, in terms of a quantum, as a quantum idea, as infinity being enormous, or infinity being absolutely infinitesimally small or limited, whatever you want to say. But in Kabbalah, the notion of the infinite is also in terms of an array of attributes or qualities or ideas or concepts or anything of that sort. The idea of anything, of everything, is within the infinite perfection of a Kadosh Baruch Hu. And yes, it's not in its created form, but it exists within the infinite perfection of the Creator. So everything prior to creation exists in a harmonious blend of coexistence. Everything. So you have the attribute of Chesed that is there, and that attribute of Chesed coexists together with the attribute of Din, which is its dialectical opposite. As we said, Chesed is outward, Din is inward. But before anything can take place in terms of creation, the Ari explains to us is that a Kadosh Baruch Hu withdraws. That withdrawal is a concentration of the attribute of Din. The attribute of Din being this oriented, limitation, boundary setting, forceful type of an attribute. The problem with that, what happens is that attribute is isolated from amongst the other attributes, and that harmonious balance which it exists within the totality of the infinite, the attribute is torn asunder. It's pulled away from its moorings from within the infinite and concentrated in one point, okay, in order to tzimtzum. So din effectively is brought to bear in this one point of withdrawal, because it's pure withdrawal, pure concentration and self-limitation, which means is that the attribute of din is isolated from attributes and concentrated and focused at this point withdrawal. Now, of course, how big is a point within infinity? Well, the point of it is that even if it is as small as the smallest dot, okay, in vis-a-vis infinity, that could be something which is bigger than the totality of our entire universe, because vis-a-vis in comparison to infinity, it actually still remains to be, it's nothing, it's everything. So that dot in which din is concentrated becomes the space, becomes the space, the halal panoi, the space from which Kadosh Baruch Hu, as it were, withdraws. And then what ends up happening over here then is that this concentration of din at this point, at this particular point, okay, is there in its abundance, and it still interacts in some form or fashion with the remnant, infinite light that was still there. So in other words, we have this space that has been vacated. Okay, yeah, that if you could imagine that there's like walls on this vacated space, there are not, but as if you could, you would say that there still is on those walls a film, like you have a glass of wine, nice glass of wine, and it makes that film over the inside of the glass from which it pulls away from as you're pouring it or drinking it, and it recedes back into its place. That film, as it was, as you can see that on in this particular concept on walls of the vacated space, which is that infinite light of a Kadosh Baruch Hu. So in this particular space of this halal hapanoin, this vacated space, is this concentration of din that are effectively interacting, together with that infinite light which is still there. Then what happens over here is that since you have this halal panoi, this vacated space, you have the roots of din, roots of stern judgment that are there, and you have remnant of the infinite light that's still there on the walls, as it were, of the vacated space. So Kadosh Baruch Hu then goes ahead and returns with a ray of light from God's essence back into this halal hapanoi, which is the beginnings, as it were, of the creation. Excuse me. Now, what is occurring at this stage is as follows. There are processes that are going on which will ultimately lead to a creation. In Lorianic terminology, a lot of these processes are very, very complex and effectively are necessary to understand, to be able to put your hand around this whole thing, and just simplify what is not a simple process. In this return back to the vacated space, back to the halal panoi, with God's essence, this ray of this divine essence which comes back, okay, there is this mechanism that is occurring there, which is referred to as Adam Kadmon, primordial man. It's not man, but what it is that it's effectively a type of next step that exists in the process of creation. Okay, that is the mechanism via which the processes are actually going to unfold. That together with the Sefirot, the creation of these spherot and all of that stuff. Now, in this process of these lights pouring forth, into the Chalal HaPanoi, and then coming out through Adam Kadmon, and coming out into the Sirot, which are then going to be the outpourings of all of these divine potencies that are moving further down into creation via the spherotic edifice that is being built. There is a mechanism that's doing this. This mechanism are a series of kalim and vessels, which are carrying this divine potency away from the Adam Kadmon, this intermediary type of step in the Chalal HaPanoi. Okay, and what ends up happening over here is that intentionally these vessels are built with a lower light that do not have the same type of strength as that which is emanating into them. There is this type of cataclysmic shattering of these vessels, which takes place, and then this light again it falls down, to a certain extent down through the edifice that is being built in the Sefirot, and it, in conjunction with the vessels that had been holding it, have fallen all the way down to the bottom. They go through all the various worlds and so forth, which we'll get to as we look at this idea more and more as we move along, all the way down into our world. And some of the light is reflected back up, some of the light comes down. But the most important thing for us to understand is that in creation, there is an imbalance that is created. There is a breakage within the system, an intentional breakage within the system, which allows for what we would call the creation of evil. God does not create evil, okay, but allows for evil to come into existence, because if there were not the possibility of evil and actual evil, man would not be able to have free choice. And the essence of man is free choice. But there has to be, as it were, this flaw within creation which enables choice to exist. If everything is perfect within the creation and everything is balanced within the creation, the Ari tells us is that man, okay, he has no choice because it's perfect. Everything's perfect. The only way that free choice comes into existence, okay, which is really what defines man as man, is by means of there being a choice. And a choice means to do good or bad in its ultimate forms. Okay, so this whole process that is described by the Ari of the breakage vessels in the process of creation, okay, results at the end of it, after the worlds are all built, in a world that is skewed, that is incomplete, that is in need of what the Ari calls tikkun, rectification. That tikkun that is engaged in is partially accomplished by Kadosh Baruch Hu himself, and partially accomplished by man in this world. Okay, charged with doing is nothing short of effectively reestablishing this pure balance of creation by means of raising this divine light which had fallen into this world as a result of the breakage of the vessels. Now understand that this is metaphoric, that this metaphoric language, it's metaphoric concept. The way that I would like to just simply describe it, and nobody should shoot, but it's like this, is that the move from infinity into the finite requires quite a process of what we would call breakage, shattering along the. I always tell my classes, it's like if you have this spectacular piece of marble that Michelangelo is working on, Lahavdil, okay, and this magnificent work is going to come out of that. What do you see at the end? What do you see on the ground and on the floor of the workshop? What you see are the shard of this marble that are all over it, the breakage effectively of that beautiful marble, which then results in in liberation of this wonderful work that comes out from it. Now, the point of the matter is that this is something that goes on because moving from the infinite into a finite mode is a dramatic breakage, is a dramatic whittling down of these powers of the Kadosh Baruch Hu, withdrawal, as well as further advancing at the same time in this process of contracting these powers and potencies in order to be able to come into into a finite concept. Okay, that's what this breakage, ultimately is. Okay, this passage from the infinite into the finite. But at the same time, man, who is a finite being, okay, is charged, as it were, with the task of restoring this perfection that exists within God's work, because God's work is ultimately perfect, and man has this unlimited potential within him, rectification, which is basically through his personal advancement and self-perfection, has the ability of restoring the harmony, the balance, the pure of the universe by means of elevation of these divine sparks, which are now in this world surrounded by the husks of the garments, as it were, of evil. Okay, as I said, metaphoric. But what happens continuously is there is need for balance. There is need for balance continuously, and balance is the Sephirotic chart. Next week, what I would like you to do is to please have your Sephirotic charts at hand. Okay, you have them with the Breslov research material has them in the back of them, because we're going to use this when we look at this idea of mishpat, when we look at the idea of das, look at the idea of our world, malchut. We're going to look at the concept of yira, of bina, and chachma, whatever, because we're going to have to go ahead and put, what Rav Nachman is saying in terms of the balancing of this world that a person is required to do in order to be ma'ala, to elevate the yira back to its source. We're going to have to understand how the Sephirotic chart works and the mechanisms within it that we are affecting by our actions. Okay, I'm going to stop right here. My time is up. It went so fast today I didn't even realize it was already an hour time. I thank everybody very, very much for attending tonight. Always always enjoyed the wonderful work. Go over this again. We're gonna go through the rest till we get to the next Agada piece over here next week. That's what we'll be able to finish it in time. Thank you very, very much. Everybody have a wonderful week.